What's up, everybody? Couch Mills here, coming at you with a Valorant Agent 6.11 tier list, where we know every single thing that is coming in the new patch, and a lot of the changes to many of your favorite agents are gonna change where they're placed in the tier list for the overall meta. Now, to climb, you need to pick the right agents, but more importantly, you need to develop the right skills, and for that, there's SkillCapped, where we have guides starting from the fundamentals like aim and movement to the more advanced positioning and game theory. Then SkillCapped will guide you on your journey to Immortal and beyond. Plus, people have been liking our Discord coaching more than ever, so what are you waiting for? Check out SkillCapped right now in the links down below. Now, first off, we gotta talk about the D tier agents, and these agents just don't see any pro play. Now, it gets a bit tricky because both Phoenix and Reyna are 0% on any pick rate scale, but for ranked play, these characters are very strong, have the ability to dominate a lobby, and have rather high win rates, especially Phoenix, who has one of the highest ranked win rates, period. In Reyna's case, she's really good if you're the best player in the lobby, and she also plays well into a lot of the rank strats like just rush a site, being able to blind with your entire team 5-man rushing. That's actually really strong if that's the strategies that you're incorporating, and Reyna kind of plays into that. And Phoenix is the Swiss Army knife of agents, where he has the means to do kind of anything himself, right? He could smoke his team onto site, he can clear cubbies with his molly, he can flash an entry, he can kind of do it all. And because he can do it all, you can fill in the gaps of your team, and that makes him a really strong ranked agent, probably an A or S tier ranked agent purely. But for more coordination and higher ranks to play, or just a lobby that is a bit more coordinated, you're not going to bring as much value as you could off of an agent that has more specialization and a stronger toolkit. So basically, for the reason that he's good in ranked is the reason that he's not good in pro play. Now, we do got to move on to the C tier characters. These characters are very strong in some situations, see niche pro play, and I think have the potential to climb even further up this list down the line. First off is Yoru. Riot tells us that Yoru has an overall low win rate until you get to the highest ranks of play. So basically, until you get to high Immortal and Radiance, Yoru players just aren't bringing as much value as other agents, but once you learn the skills that you need, all of a sudden you're dominating. I think that's one of the reasons why it's actually really good to grind Yoru and become better, because you know that when you fully master this character, then the sky's the limit for your impact. Maybe you won't be given any free wins early on, but if you get the skills to deserve the wins, I think it feels a hell of a lot better. And even pro players are still trying to figure this character out fully, and some teams are trying to experiment with him here or there, but I would say that it might be a while until we fully see Yoru completely actualized as his highest potential, because I think he's probably like a top 3 highest skill ceiling character in the game. Next up, we have Neon, which is good as a ranked stomper, but unfortunately for the character, she's fairly niche in the maps that she's good at. She's decent on Lotus, she's decent on Fracture, she almost always needs a character to set her up, an initiator, but in those compositions, in those situations, she looks phenomenal. It's just that she is not going to be a character that is going to be the driving force for any meta, more of a role filler that has very powerful mobility and a ranked stomper. Last up in the C tier, we have Fade. Fade is still really strong, but she's not seeing a crazy amount of play, primarily because for her role in the initiator category, it's very competitive. There's so many strong picks, as you'll see later on in the video, that it makes hard to justify playing Fade when compared to all that powerful utility. And then on the maps that she's actually the best on, it's also the best to rock double controller most of the time, so her slot just gets cut, even though she is an objectively fairly powerful agent, and I would imagine that with changes to the meta, she might see an uptick in play. Now we move on to the B tier with agents that are very strong, really strong placeholders, have a ton of potential, or at the cusp of being meta staples. First off, we do got to talk about Sage. Sage is going to be good on maps like Icebox and Bind. Her ultimate's still great, her utility's still great. This character is strong, it's just that there's a lot of maps where there's a better option, and that's why she doesn't have an established enough presence. But I do think for ranked play, you can always find a way to find value with Sage, and I think she's a fairly strong pick. Next up, we have Cypher, which is unfortunately being pushed out a little bit because of the other strong Sentinel, aka Killjoy, just eating up most of the play. Cypher is going to be strong on some maps, and there are teams, especially in non-American regions, actually experimenting with Cypher. I also do think that for ranked, he's just naturally stronger, being able to use all that utility to your advantage, and basically there is no disciplined removal of utility, which means you're going to get extra value, not only based on him, but characters like Killjoy as well. And Cypher is kind of just only here based on comparison. In a world without Killjoy existing, I do think that Cypher would be a lot better, but right now Killjoy is so strong, it's hard to justify picking her over him on most of the maps where both of them are fine. fine. Next up, we do got to talk about Astra. Astra's eating up a good percentage of the pick rate on some maps, particularly Split. She's seeing like 100% pick rate, seeing some play in double controller setups on maps like Pearl. But outside of that, she's not really seeing a ton of play. She almost never sees play as the solo controller. She's mainly in double controller setups that we're seeing with Harbor. Spoiler alert, he's in the B tier as well. But I do think for rank, she's going to be a little bit harder to pull off because not only do you not have the coordination, but it's going to be hard to get that consistent duo controller setup unless you're duoing. But still, she's an objectively powerful character and she deserves her space in the B tier. The next up, we do got to talk about Harbor. Harbor is seeing consistent play on many maps actually out of nowhere. He's really shining right now in this double controller meta. Seeing play on Pearl, Bind, Icebox, and some little smatterings of play here and there. Honestly, Harbor's really strong, and I think that it's kind of interesting how we've seen the meta develop where Harbor's strengths really do lie in that double controller lineup, especially we're seeing him a fair bit with Viper. And I think that thinking about his kit not as doing the job of a normal controller, but allowing you to have extra space creation and the retake of space is super strong. But once again, in ranked play, it might be a little bit hard to set this up unless you're in a duo, but still, he deserves a B tier spot. And then last up, we do got to talk about Gekko. Right now, this character is still being experimented with heavily. He's not seeing a stable amount of play, but based on the little amount of time he's been in the pool, he's actually been tried a lot, and a lot of teams are adopting them on certain maps. And I do think that over time, teams will actually like this character more. Specifically, the fact that he can use his utility to take space, grab it again, and use it again is actually a really strong use of initiator utility. And I think that the other initiators, they get more one-off value, but he gets more value if you can actually play around that in a coordinated setting. And I also think he's unique enough that he could be in double initiator lineups as well. So don't write Gekko off just yet. This character is a sleeper for sure. Now we're gonna move on to A tier, characters that are established parts of the meta that pro teams are building teams around or learning how to counter. And at the bottom of the A tier, we have Viper. And really, Viper should be towards the top of the A tier based on her current pick rate. But remember, she is getting quite a sizable nerf as of 6.11, and that's gonna knock her down a peg. But she's still powerful enough and unique enough that she's not gonna be heavily impacted. Just her impact is going to be a bit weaker, and some of these other options are going to be slightly more appealing than they were before. Still, doesn't change her meta dominance as a character that is seeing a lot of play, consistent play on Icebox and Split, seeing Split play with double controller setups on Bind and Lotus and Pearl. She's still a controller that I would say every controller player should know how to at least flex to, because that's how strong she is on the maps that she needs to be played on. Next off and around the same space, we got to talk about Brimstone, and Brimstone is really strong on maps like Fracture and Bind, but the main weakness to Brim is that there's a lot of dome smokers that are fighting for his spot right now. Characters like Omen, characters like Astra, they're eating up his pick rate because they're all kind of cannibalizing each other for the same spot. Brim is still strong on the maps he's good in, and I think for ranked play, he gets extra stock by being the easiest controller to flex to as someone who is not a controller player, but you need to play controller. Brim is kind of your guy. But I do want to talk about Breach. Breach is just seeing quite a bit of play right now, close to 100% on Fracture, Haven, and really, he's a strong character for any strategy that is very proactive. If you're trying to do something like set up a duelist in an aggressive position and take space off of it, make plays off of it, he's your guy. He's the best to do that with. But in ranked, of course, this is going to be harder to set up. So if you are a Breach main, I would highly suggest duoing, especially with a duelist like a Raze, a Jett, a Neon, someone that can take your proactive utility and turn it into a play, because it's a lot harder for you to do that yourself. But this character is really strong, established in the meta, seeing a lot of pick rate on the maps he's good in, and it's honestly cementing the diverse map agent meta, which I think is overall healthy for the game. Now we do got to talk about Kayo, who's seeing maxed out play in Ascent and pretty much a sizable chunk on almost every single map. And most pro teams seem to understand that Kayo is not always the best, but he's always a solid pick that provides good utility for a team. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean he fits perfectly in the meta, and I don't really think he does. There's a lot of other picks that are a little bit better to do what he wants to do, but give you a bit more, namely Skye, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And he is going to get docked a few points for ranked play, primarily just because he is better in a coordinated setting. He's better when you can flash for your team. He's better when you know lineups and your team can follow through with them. But I do think that the versatility of his kit is so good that he's just a solid character no matter what. Now, last but certainly not least, we do got to talk about Sova. Sova is seeing a ton of play on Haven, Ascent, and Icebox. And in a sea of so many competitive initiators, the fact that he has this much pick rate on the maps he's good in is testament to his ability. And I do think that between him and Skye, that's almost like 100% pick rate on the majority of maps besides Fracture, which is really impressive. All in all, this character is super strong. The lineups are great. The ability to impact the game is great. Your ultimate is good. He's really a fantastic ranked and pro agent with tons of skill expression. And while right now this character is only fluttering around a high A tier worth of pick rate, I imagine that that could change like it has done many times in the past. And really, you could justify this character being S tier in the majority of metas in the game. Now, last but certainly not least, we do got to talk about the S tier agents. And right off the bat, I do want to talk about Raze. Raze with about a 40% win rate, maxed out on Fracture, maxed out on Split, maxed out on Bind. Seeing a lot of play on the map she's good in. A really powerful agent with utility that is really unlike anything else in the game. Now, you could make an argument that this character is going to get a bit weaker with the run and gun change, but honestly, I don't think it's going to affect this agent at all. She's super strong, and I honestly think that she's even better in ranked play. So yeah, one of the best characters to play in main, period, in my opinion. Now, next off, we do got to talk about Omen. Omen is the best controller right now by the numbers, and he's super good on the maps that he's played. Maxed out Haven, Ascent, and Lotus. Not really seeing that much play in the other maps, and really the controller meta right now is like everyone gets a little slice of their pie. No controller is perfect on every single map, and really between Omen and Viper, I think that that's a really solid controller pool, but really there's a lot of combination of pools you can have. But I do think that Omen gets the best plus for ranked in particular, mainly because I think that you can have more impact over games by being able to lurk and still smoke for your team, and Omen's the best at doing that, so I'm gonna put him all the way up at the S tier. But the next character that we do got to talk about is Jett, and really it's not about what maps Jett is played on, it's more like what maps is Jett not played on, because she's played on pretty much everything. Her lowest pick rates are about 30 to 40% on Fracture and Bind, but for everything else, Ascent, Pearl maxed out, Haven 75%, Lotus 75%, Icebox 75%. I mean, we're just seeing some ridiculous amounts of pick rates pretty much across the board for this character, and this character is super strong. The linchpin of the majority of compositions in pro play right now are being played with a Jett. This doesn't necessarily mean that she is dictating the meta, because I actually don't think she is. I think that's Killjoy. We'll talk about that more in a second. But in the meta that exists, she's the best duelist. She's the best initiator in set meta. Yeah, Jett is super strong, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, regardless of these chamber buffs or anything like that. Now, next up, we do got to talk about Skye, and Skye is kind of great. And one of the reasons why a lot of initiators are down in pick rate is because Skye has eaten it all up, seeing really high pick rates on Pearl, Lotus, almost maxed up pick rates on Split and Bind, seeing some pick rates on pretty much every other map as well. The fact that you can get information in not one but two ways with your dog and your bird, and you have the ability to set up your team's plays, is really just unparalleled. The combination between Skye and either Raze or Jett is like a linchpin for the meta right now. Super strong and proactive, and a good way to take control of space very rapidly. And I do think that in the current meta, Skye really shines, and for ranked play, she's really one of the best initiators that you could possibly play, if not the best in ranked. So yeah, I mean, what's not to love about Skye? But we do got to talk about the top of the meta. But before we do, let's talk about Chamber, who recently got a pretty sizable buff, and players are wondering where Chamber will end up. And realistically, Chamber might be C or bottom of B tier. He is going to be better, but I do need you to understand that he's not going to come back in full force, because he's nowhere near the power that he was when he was actually meta 100% of the time. And while he is going to be a fair bit better and might even see established play, don't think that we're going to enter a Chamber meta out of nowhere. It's just not going to happen based on the buffs that we've seen. Now, the top of the meta, and what is really dictating the entire meta, is Killjoy. Killjoy seeing play on basically every single map besides Split and Bind. She's almost 100%. She's really warping the entire meta around her, and her power is even stronger in ranked play, where it's harder to be disciplined and clear out her utility, and your team can really cheat to one side when you're set up on a certain point. I think that Killjoy is really strong right now. If you want to get some wins in ranked, I think that you should be grinding Killjoy and being very disciplined on point and being very smart with your rotations, and you'll climb. But I don't imagine that Killjoy will maintain this state forever, so just expect this character to get nerfed at some point in the next 3 months. That's probably going to happen. Now, if you want to climb, though, the best thing that you could get is SkillCapped, with tips, tricks, and guides over everything from movement to aim to positioning and more. If you really want to climb to the next rank up, or climb all the way to Immortal or even Radiant, then you're going to need in-depth coaching that you'll only find on SkillCapped. So what are you waiting for? Go check it out right now in the links down below.